Tonight, the government and the Prime Minister are under new pressure over the grooming gangs scandal. Two survivors of abuse resign from their roles on the national inquiry as the Conservatives accuse Labour of letting down victims. Ministers say they will provide what is necessary to allow fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv to attend a match in Birmingham next month, despite a riot at one of the matches over the weekend. The Met Police says it will no longer investigate so-called non-crime hate incidents after it knows that the father tech creator Graham Linehan wouldn't face any further action for social media posts about transgender issues. As Buckingham Palace sources tell Sky News that allegations against Prince Andrew should be fully examined, I'll speak to a York MP who's proposed legislation that would strip him of his Duke of York title. Plus, a major overhaul to the education system for pupils aged 16 to 19 with a new V-level vocational qualification. I'll be speaking to the Skills Minister, Baroness Jackie Smith. And as Donald Trump posts an AI-generated video of him literally dumping poo onto protesters from a jet, we'll look at the increasingly blurred line between fact and fantasy. All that and more with the very real panellists tonight, John Nicholson and Tom Pursglove will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening. Tonight, I want to talk to you about trust, or the serious lack of it in our institutions. Because from the Church of England to our political bodies and politicians to the monarchy, particularly in recent days with the continued allegations swirling around Prince Andrew, confidence and faith in the cornerstones of this country have taken a battering in recent years. And it's not just those big institutions, but locally too. Trust has ebbed from police forces, from our hospitals and social services. Again, they've been buffeted by scandal after scandal over the past few decades. And so we turn to one of our greatest outrages in recent times, a true source of national shame. That is, of course, the grooming gangs and their victims. Victims who were ignored, disregarded for years. Victims who've had to fight hard in and outside of courts to see justice. And survivors who simply now want the truth to prevent anything like this happening again. And yet, we're still not there. Yes, the government have finally committed themselves to a full national statutory inquiry, but 4 months on, there are deep disagreements on what its remit should be and who should chair it. Today, one of the survivors, Fiona Goodhart, resigned from the panel overseeing the inquiry. Why? Because she alleged it lacked transparency, that there was condescending and controlling language, because crucial decisions were being made in secret. This evening, another, Ellie Reynolds, has joined her. The inquiry itself, before it's even started, stands accused of leading a toxic, fearful environment for the very survivors. God, after years of trauma, this is the last thing they need. Ultimately, this inquiry, if it is to succeed, if it's to bring some sort of closure to the victims that they desperately want, it will need a chair and a remit that people trust. Yet right now, it appears that that trust is still sorely lacking. And all this, of course, now looks like it is going to reignite as a political issue too, because today we've heard from the Conservative leader, Badenoch, who's responded to that resignation on X. This is what the Conservative leader had to say. This is deeply troubling. Many will now suspect Labour is sabotaging the grooming gangs inquiry and deliberately dragging it out beyond the next election. Fiona is a courageous survivor and a relentless campaigner who's done more than almost anyone to expose grooming gang scandal. It has now been over 4 months since Keir Starmer was dragged into launching a national inquiry, yet nothing has happened. We need a judge-led inquiry with full statutory powers. Time for the Prime Minister to grow a backbone and do everything possible to ensure criminal investigations run in parallel now across the entire system, Whitehall, the CPS, the police and local authorities. Survivors and victims need real justice for these horrific crimes. Well, let's get more on this from our Home Affairs editor, Jason Farrell, who broke the story over the weekend about the possible leadership of this inquiry, which prompted today's resignations. And Jason, this has been the most difficult of inquiries even before it is started.
Yeah, when we broke this story on Saturday, that it was Jim Gamble, a former police officer, and Annie Hudson, who's worked in social services, both at the top of their game, it has to be said, and both who've worked for institutions that have scrutinised their own institutions, if you like. They've both been critical of them in the past. Nonetheless, we did say that there were concerns amongst the survivors that these were the institutions, they belonged to the institutions that had let them down, the police force and social workers. And, you know, we know from having covered many of these cases that those organisations have in the past in various local capacities let those victims and survivors down. And now we get this letter from Fiona Goddard. I've met Fiona many times. I remember last time was in June. She was very excited about the fact there was going to be a national inquiry. She wanted one in her hometown of Bradford. She had been the subject of extreme abuse when she was in care from the age of 13, when she was groomed by a gang of men and was trafficked to different places around the country. If you read the report into what happened to her, it is horrific. It does not make good reading. So it was great to have her on the panel, but she is one of those who is not happy about all of this. And it has to be said, it's not just about the leaders, the chairs who are going to be appointed. There's a lot more in these letters. So she talks about a toxic environment, condescending, controlling language. Again, this isn't the chairs, this is the people around setting up this inquiry. Concerns about expanding the scope of the inquiry and risks of watering it down. And it's same sort of story for the letter from Elianne Reynolds. She says we've been kept in the dark by the Home Office, withheld information, treated with contempt, isolated. A number of us raised concerns, but those concerns went nowhere. And again, talking about this change of the remit, saying that it was going to be widened in ways that downplayed the racial and religious motivations behind our abuse, central to why the institutions failed to act. So there's this deep malaise amongst these two victims. I know others as well about this. I think it is a shame that these two chairs haven't got to Tuesday, which is when they were actually going to meet them, just to explain what exactly they were going to do and what they were going to bring to this. But as you read from that tweet from Kevin Badenoch, leader of the opposition, they fail from the outset because they're not judges. And that's what Kevin Badenoch wants. That's what some of the victims want. They want this to be a judge-led inquiry. I mean, it should be said, of course, that Alexis Jay was not a judge. She was also a social worker. They tried to appoint judges for that, you'll remember. And again, actually, it was the victims that came out and had all sorts of worries about their conflicts of interest. Back in 2014, it was Theresa May who was dealing with the headache then. But now it is really important that someone drives this and someone takes the helm of it, because at the moment it's feeling very, very wobbly, I would have to say. The Home Office has given a statement and they say any suggestion this inquiry is being watered down is completely wrong. And they say that they are working to urgently appoint the best possible chair. As I say, if there's anyone left on that panel of victims, they will hear what the chairs have to say, and ultimately it will be up to the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister to make the decisions.
OK, Jason, live for us there in the newsroom. Thank you very much indeed. And just to say that following up what Jason just said right now, we have had a statement through from the Home Office this afternoon saying that the abuse of children by grooming gangs is one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. Any suggestion that this inquiry is being watered down is completely wrong, and we're committed to delivering a robust, thorough inquiry that will get through to the truth and provide the answers the survivors have so long campaigned for. OK, we did get reaction to this story, and indeed another story about skills from the Minister, Baroness Jackie Smith, who's both a skills minister, but she is also the Minister for Equalities and Women. And I talked to her about both of these big political stories today, but I started, as you will well see now, on this issue of the grooming gangs. Baroness Smith, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News tonight. And we are going to get on to talk about the qualifications, vocational qualifications in a second. But I do want to start on what is our top story tonight, which is the grooming gangs inquiry. It is clear, for different reasons, but that some of the victims who are going to be involved in setting up this inquiry effectively aren't happy. And that must be of concern to the government.
Well, what I think is really important here is that we get on as quickly as possible with setting up the inquiries, but we do it in a way that maintains the confidence of victims. Because what we need to happen here is for people to feel that actually we are getting to the bottom of what happened. We are ensuring that victims can feel confident that action is being taken. So, yeah, of course, you know, there is a challenge there, isn't there, between how quickly you can go and how you can engage victims. I have no doubt that my colleagues in the Home Office are working very hard in order to make sure that they get this right.
But you're right in terms of that, because, you know, what some of these survivors seem to be suggesting, what some of the victims seem to be suggesting, is that effectively there is no transparency here. They don't trust the process already. And even there's been a lack of trust, hasn't there? I think that's kind of what my thought is tonight. And it's, by the way, trust that has ebbed away from our police forces, from our social services, from big institutions. We're seeing that play out with the Monarchy and the Church of England. How does government rebuild that trust, particularly when it comes to people who don't necessarily trust the local police or the local judiciary or the local social services these days?
Well, first of all, I think on the whole, we still have in this country a good a good police force, and you know, I hope that people would feel able to trust them. But when, as you say, Darren, something has happened that has so undermined people's confidence that authorities are taking them seriously, when they feel that their voices haven't been heard, then it is important to make sure that they feel confident in the process, whilst also recognising that people are saying, look, it's taken too long to get to this point, and now we need to see progress. Getting those two things right will be what my ministerial colleagues are really focused on now.
OK, let's move on to these new V levels, vocational levels. What are you trying to achieve here? Is it simply kind of streamlining?
No, it's more than that. It's about saying that we, in wanting to renew and rebuild the country, at a time when there are considerable shortages in the skills that we need to do that, and at a time when young people want to be clear about how they can get into the good jobs and the good opportunities that there are for them later on in life, how we can make a system that enables us to do all of those things. There are too many qualifications in the system. There are over 900 qualifications for people who don't want to do A-levels or T-levels.
Okay.
So it's important that we have a system whereby you can be clear that if you start on a qualification, you know where you might end up. So if you know you want to go to university or you're interested in academic study, the well-established A-level route is probably for you. If you know that you're clear about what occupation you want to do, T-levels with their industrial placements are a brilliant way for you to focus on that particular occupation. But supposing you know that you want to learn in a more applied way, to be assessed perhaps in a more practical way, you're not completely sure that you know exactly what you want to do, but you know that's the way you learn best. Well, V-levels, based on national standards, linked to what employers say that they want in those areas, will be a really important choice.
But isn't the concern here, though, that we keep chopping and changing this? As you said, there's a lot of different names that have popped up over the years. Academia succeeds for two reasons, in the sense that there's just a long history of people wanting to appreciate that more, but also it's stayed pretty constant for a very long period of time. Isn't the concern that when you keep changing things, rebranding them, that actually people go, employers, others go, I don't know what this actually means?
Well, look, you know, back before 1997, I was a teacher for 11 years, and I saw plenty of change. But what I also saw was a system, and the Prime Minister talked about this at our conference, where academic qualifications, as you say, are well regarded, people understand them, they talk a lot about them. Vocational and technical qualifications have not yet managed to get the currency, the credibility that they need to have in an economy and a society where we need people to take those routes into skilled work. We need people to be able to learn in a more applied way.
But how does the government change those really ingrained perceptions?
Well, one of the ways you do it is by making sure that you're clear about the standards of them, that you're clear that they, you know, if they say that they're preparing you for a vocational area or an occupation, that it's employers that have said, well, these are the things that we need people to learn, then you can be clear that what you're learning is something that employers will then recognise. I think in doing that, we can both provide choice for people, for young people, in terms of the route that they take, and we can make sure that that's a choice that is high quality and that will get them where they want to go, and that will help the country to develop the sorts of skills we need to renew and rebuild.
There we go. That was Jackie Smith speaking to me a little earlier. We'll be getting more from Baroness Smith in a second. But first, let's bring in our duo for this evening, the former Scottish National Party MP, John Nicholson, and the former Conservative MP and Legal Migration Minister, Tom Pursglove, who, as you can see, are both with me in the studio. Good evening, gentlemen. On this Monday evening, we're going to start actually on the grooming gangs story. And Tom, this is just a reminder. I mean, for many of these victims, this has been going on for decades. You know, whether it is trying to raise this as an issue, try and get it through the court, try to get some sense of inquiry, and yet we're still having arguments about what this inquiry looks like tonight.
I think that this has been handled appallingly, actually, from start to finish, because when you think about the fact that...
by both governments, must be said.
No, so I think we made some real strides forward in terms of trying to get to the truth, driving the number of prosecutions. But what we have seen in recent months is a whole new slew of allegations come forward that point to some really troubling trends in how these issues were handled in certain parts of the country. And I think the fact that survivors have been so clear about the harm that it's done to them, the impact on the communities that they live in, and that fight for justice. Ministers just haven't handled this in a way that I would consider to be sensitive. The fact that there are these arguments about remit, the fact that there are these arguments about timings, the fact that there are these outstanding issues around the chairmanship, the government just hasn't acted with the speed which I think most people in the country would have expected on this. And so that is manifesting itself along the way because we're just not making the progress that people would want in order to get to the truth. And we owe it to these survivors. They've been through absolute hell.
There is little doubt about this. It is complicated. It's complicated. You were just pointing out to me, as we were playing that interview there with Baroness Smith, that it's a devolved matter as well.
It is.
But this is a complicated issue. I mean, there are lots of victims in lots of different parts of the country and lots of potential institutions involved.
I think it's so depressing that we're talking about process again tonight, rather than talking about the victims. And it really shouldn't be something that politicians squabble about, because it makes the debate and the discussion all about the Labour Party, Conservative Party, which party handled it better, which party handled it worse. I imagine the victims are listening to this when they watch these discussions and they want to scream with frustration, because it shouldn't be about politicians, it should be about the victims. How have we got to a stage where, as you point out, after a decade, we're still talking about process? As you pointed out, it is devolved. North of the border, the government's introduced legislation for a victims commissioner. I hope that will work. I hope it will encourage people to come forward. As I understand it, Police Scotland say that there are no active inquiries at the moment looking into the equivalent of grooming gangs. So it is a different position north of the border. But, you know, it's one of these situations where I really wish, and you've got this big picture of Westminster behind you, and Tom and I were talking about how select committees are often very good places for politicians to work together. This is clearly one of those situations.
Has what Committee Badenoch done today helped, Tom? I mean, you know...
It's too tribal.
Making a party political issue.
Exactly.
Well, Kemi feels very passionately about this, and she has spent time with some of these survivors who have shared their experiences, their trauma, and it's about getting justice for them. But it's also about getting to grips with any outstanding issues that are still happening in communities around the country. And what we've heard is more allegations about more communities that have been affected by this criminality. We have a duty, with urgency, to root that out, to get to the bottom of it, to understand those circumstances and bring to justice anybody who has been responsible for that criminality. And of course, importantly as well, anybody who's been responsible for covering that up. This does not command public confidence. I would like to see a greater coming together of our politicians on this, but I do think the government was slow off the blocks, dealt with this in a piecemeal manner, and that inevitably has made this more political than it ought to have been.
OK. Gentlemen, we're going to pause for there on this point, and we will be a story we're going to come back to time and time again, not least for Home Affairs Editor Jason Farrell, that you saw tonight, has done a lot of work on this story, and we've got that big meeting tomorrow with the prospective chairs. We'll see how that goes. But we want to turn to the other big political issue of today, and it's been running also for the last week or so. That is, the government has said the decision over whether or not Israeli fans should be allowed to attend that match in Birmingham next month lies with the police. The Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, told MPs that a decision taken by Birmingham's Safety Advisory Group to keep fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv from the match and Aston Villa should be reconsidered.
In any situation, there is a risk that must be assessed. But in this case, the risk this event presents is in no small part down to the risk inherent in where the away fans come from and who they are. It is in that context that the solution that is proposed to exclude a group from attending is wrong. It chooses exclusion rather than looking at the full options available to manage that risk and include.
OK, let's bring in our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, who's with us in the newsroom, following on from what Lisa Nandy had to say in Parliament. And Rob, what has, I suppose in some ways, changed a little bit this story is what happened over the weekend in Israel itself. Just remind us what went on.
Yes, a complication, because at the Tel Aviv derby yesterday, there was disorder. Now, it was between Hapoel Tel Aviv and Maccabi Tel Aviv, who are heading to Aston Villa in a couple of weeks. It does seem from a lot of the images, and certainly Maccabi Tel Aviv are saying that the disorder was largely the Hapoel Tel Aviv fans. You can see a lot of their colours, the red flares that were actually launched onto the pitch, which stopped the match going ahead. There were moments of disorder in the streets as well around the stadium in Tel Aviv, but certainly Maccabi Tel Aviv are trying to put that on their rivals Hapoel. They do share the same stadium, but that has complicated this matter even further, and we are hearing from the government that they will be seeking information from the Israeli police to now feed in to this discussion around the Europa League match in 2.5 weeks. But the government is very much insistent that all fans should be allowed into this game, including the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. And Lisa Nandy saying that a lot of those fans will be from Britain. A lot will be British Jews. And there is a deep concern, the fact that this ban by Birmingham City Council is excluding Israelis and Jews from a match at a time that inclusion should be promoted. But in the Commons, we did hear the unrest brought up yesterday, also past instances involving Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. A year ago in Amsterdam, there were anti-Arab chants heard from them. They did rip down Palestinian flags, but there was disorder that they'd faced. They were actually attacked in the streets by locals in Amsterdam. But, you know, we heard from Zara Sultana, the independent MP, saying that as well, that there's a history of racist hooliganism amongst the fan base, and that many of these fans, she said, are active or former soldiers who've taken part, as she called it, in Israel's genocide in Gaza, something that Israel denies. But Lisa Nandy says that British Jews in particular should not be blamed for the actions of the Israeli government. We also heard from Ayub Khan MP, the Aston MP, who's very much launched this petition to get the game called off completely. And, you know, he said it was actually disingenuous to conflate this as a matter of banning Jews. But Lisa Nandy highlighting particularly in the climate in this country coming a few weeks after the deadly terror attack on the synagogue, how this government wants to show that the country's about inclusion, not excluding, well, not against those pro-Palestinian protests, which we are perhaps sure to see potentially more of now around this fixture, because it's become so heated, not just as a footballing matter, but also as a political matter and a diplomatic matter as well involving the Israeli government.
Indeed it has. Rob, live for us there in the newsroom, thank you very much indeed. Well, as I said a little earlier, we also put some of these points to the Skills Minister, Baroness Jackie Smith, who of course is also a former Home Secretary, about the policing around this game. The other big story today, and we saw an urgent question in Parliament about this decision around Maccabi Tel Aviv and Aston Villa. And what we saw at the weekend in Israel itself, is there a concern here, and you know this as a former Home Secretary, is that the police service are meant to be independent in the sense that they make operational decisions outside of politics. And actually what Westminster Police may well have done is made an operational decision that now, by the way, is being crowded out by politicians, including the Prime Minister.
Well, I'm a former Home Secretary. I'm a current Villa fan. So, yes, I am interested in this. Yeah. But, you know, these decisions are being made in the context of a country where we believe that you should be able to take part in not just football matches, but public events without risk of violence or without being prevented from doing that by virtue of your nationality or your religion. And what we need to do, and I think there was a feeling that this was the wrong decision because it looked as if people were being penalised on that basis. And that's not the country we are. That's not the football club that Aston Villa is.
No.
So actually what we hope and we're working to try to ensure is that that football match can go ahead. It can go ahead in a way that everybody is safe, where the police are able to enable that to happen and to prevent any violence that might have been going to occur.
But the point here is that decision may just have been based on the evidence that they just think that there's... It doesn't matter necessarily the nationality or the ethnicity of these fans, that just given what's happened in the past, that it might be an operational decision that there's the prospect of violence, and so we just don't think it's an event that we can police properly.
Well, of course the police need to make operational decisions, but the decisions that they make send a message. I have to say, not the police, but I have to say some of the people who have argued for this have very much not simply been arguing for it on the basis of public safety. There's been some pretty disgusting stuff, actually, on social media around this. That's not the country that we are, and we need to support the police to do what the police do week in, week out, which is to make sure that people in this country can go about their lives, can attend football, regardless of which country they've come from, what their background is, what their religion is. Of course, containing any vandalism or hooliganism that might arise, but doing it in a way that enables people to carry on living their lives. That's what we are as a country, and that's what we need to see here.
Just very, very friendly on this. What I get, and I'm not a massive football fan, I do like going to sporting events, but...
Well, you're missing out.
I know, I am. But I'm also concerned about is that police do seem to be spending an inordinate amount of time now not dealing with crime and prosecuting criminals, but policing events and policing particularly sporting events. They're clearly quite stretched. We see this in London a lot. We see it elsewhere in the country. Isn't there a concern that, you know, in an era in which people are concerned about certain types of crimes, the police seem to spend an awful lot of time covering these events?
Well, police have always, with contributions from clubs, policed large public events.
That
is part of policing. But, I mean, where you're right, Darren, of course, is that they also need to be seen in our communities, working alongside people to help to prevent and to tackle crime. That's why this government is reintroducing the neighbourhood policing approach that we developed when I was the Home Secretary and we were last in government, because then people will feel confident that they see police officers, that they can report things to them, that they see action being taken on, at an early stage on antisocial behaviour. You're right, people need to have confidence in policing. Okay. Part of that confidence has been eroded because the last government undermined the ability of the police to act in that way that we do in Britain as neighbourhood police officers and with the consent of the public.
OK, Jackie Smith speaking to me a little earlier. You're watching The Politics Up here on Sky News. A lot to get through on all of that with our panel. And there's more policing controversy tonight, as well as the Met says it's going to abandon investigations into so-called non-crime hate incidents. What do these guys think about that? And you would hope we'll be talking about that after the break. Stay tuned.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub on this Monday night. Let's get more on that controversial football game that's due to take place in Birmingham next week, and indeed on the decision by the Metropolitan Police essentially tonight to say that they're going to stop investigating certain types of hate crimes. As you can see, John and Tom are still with me. John, let's start with you first of all. Just on this policing incident of this football game, what's your sense? Like, essentially, operationally, should this just be left up to the police, or does politics need to get involved?
Well, I loved listening to Jackie Smith there, who they started off saying that this was entirely the wrong decision, and the Prime Minister said it must be reconsidered, and then she said, but we must support the police. I mean, which is it? Are you supporting the police? Are you undermining the police? This is a police decision. And let's be clear about this. These football supporters, there's a lot of thugs in their number, and it's not just England that's worried about it. Well, we've seen incidents. Obviously, we all know about the incidents in Amsterdam with racist chanting and people being beaten up. So they're a thoroughly obnoxious crowd. And I think, by the way, what the Culture Secretary has done to conflate a lot of these thugs with ordinary, decent Jewish people in this country is entirely inappropriate.
I'll challenge you a little bit on that. So first of all, I don't think we can brand all the fans as thugs. That would be wrong to do so. But
I said a lot of them are thugs.
Yeah, well, we don't even know if there's a lot of them. It could be a very small minority. But the second thing here is, and this is what I think Jackie Smith was referring to, is that if you look at some of the people who are opposing this game, some of the stuff that's been said on social media, some of the stuff that may well have led the police to be concerned, it is very much about who these fans are, that they're Jewish and that they come from Israel.
Well, obviously, as your correspondent pointed out, there's concerns in Tel Aviv about these fans running riot. Whatever number they are, they're enough to cause concerns with the police in Israel. Of course, you're going to get folk who have a variety of different motivations for doing and saying what they say on social media and elsewhere. But ultimately, this was a recommendation by the police force, concerns by the police force about these thugs. And if the Labour government doesn't want to undermine the police, they should stop doing so. Tom?
Look, Ministers dropped the ball on this. They had advance notice that this decision was likely to come, or that there was a risk of this decision. And what they should have been doing was making very clear that that would be an unacceptable outcome. Now, of course, there is operational independence within policing, but there are things that government can do. For example, where you've got domestic fans who cause disturbance or trouble at fixtures, you use football banning orders. Overseas fans, you've got intelligence sharing capabilities with other countries that mean that, for example, intelligence about what happened in Amsterdam, which has been cited as a particular concern, you could curtail entry clearance or decline entry clearance for those fans. But also, there is a perfectly acceptable approach to levering in additional policing resources to get this fixture on. We see endless policing resources attributed and used to support protests at the weekend to make sure that that can happen. And I think the worrying thing with all this is that British Jews feel that this is effectively creating sort of no-go areas, and we're also penalising the law-abiding majority, and that just isn't the British way. And so I really would urge ministers to grip this. They should have been much.
So you think the decision should be reversed as well?
There's practical things they can do to help policing to make this happen.
Just on that, has this now become a matter of principle, though, John, where actually you say that, yes, you know what, the police are concerned about what may well happen, but in the end, we need to prove as a country that things that are important should be allowed to go ahead, and that there should not be no-go areas, which is what some of the people who oppose this game would like to see.
Yeah, I know some people would. Well, we have banned football supporters in the past, haven't we, in this country, because of a threat to public order and public safety. I think it's a real mistake for politicians to do what they're doing and to try and conflate anti-Semitism with this law and order issue. And I think
that's what those tools I mentioned would help.
I think that's a mistake they've made.
OK, let's turn to the other story that's happened in the last hour or so, and that is the Met Police, and this follows the Graham Linehan incident. You may remember a father arrested at Heathrow Airport a month or so ago. Anyway, they say, I think they're going to take no further action against him, but they're also going to stop investigating what they call non-crime hate incidents. Tom, I assume you probably welcome this.
Alleluia. I mean, look, this has gone too far, and we have a proud history in this country of freedom of speech. And I just think that non-crime hate incidents has gone way beyond what was ever envisaged.
By the way, a lot of this happened when you were in government. I think actually some of what you did in government made this more likely to be a police issue.
Well, what happened was that we revised the guidance away, you know, the way in which some of these issues have been handled. I think that has got far worse over the course of the last couple of years. And on so many of these areas, there are other offences that can be brought to bear. For example, if people are threatening or intimidating, there are other offences that can capture that allow prosecutors to bring those cases. This has been a huge distraction, huge abstraction of resources away from frontline policing. So I'm really pleased that this allows, actually, police officers to get on with policing in communities, catching thieves, bringing people to justice that ought to be brought to justice, rather than policing tweets online.
John?
I'm a gay man. I get a lot of very nasty homophobic abuse online. Just last week, I think it was, somebody tweeted at me with a hangman's noose and said, hang all fags, right? So I would make a distinction. I think you're entitled under free speech to say, I hate homosexuals. I think you should be able to do that. Grotesquely distasteful, but I think you should be allowed to do that. What I don't think you should be allowed to say is to encourage violence against gays or women or any other group. That is the distinction I would make. And I think that's the distinction that most reasonable people who advocate free speech would make too.
OK. It is, as you say, it's a very personal discussion and it's an ongoing one. But it is interesting the Met, I think, given the resources, have decided to make this decision tonight. For the moment, gentlemen. Again, thank you very much indeed, because we are going to take another break here on the Politics Hub. Up next, I'll be speaking to the MP who's calling for a change in the law in the light of Prince Andrew giving up his titles and honours. We'll be talking about that, and we'll have the interview after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, a Buckingham Palace source has told Sky News this afternoon that the royal family believes that allegations against Prince Andrew should be examined in the proper and fullest ways. On Friday, Andrew, of course, announced that he was relinquishing the use of his titles and honours, and he again denied any wrongdoing. But the move has renewed calls from some MPs to change the law so that the King has the power to remove titles on his own initiative. As it stands, only Parliament can officially remove a person's titles. Well, one of those MPs is the MP for York Central, that's Rachel Maskell, and I spoke to her a little earlier about the bill that she's proposing. Rachel, very good evening to you. You are talking about trying to change the law here, or to bring a law into Parliament. Just exactly what do you want to bring about when it comes to Prince Andrew?
Well, we know at the moment, whilst the Duke of York can lay aside his title, he still holds his title. And I brought forward private members' legislation in the past in order to see titles removed, not just around this case, but it would be for all cases. A very simple amendment could be made to a constitutional bill, or a private member's bill could come forward to rotate this. And all that we need to do is either to establish a ground committee of both Houses of Parliament, the Lords and the Commons, coming together, making recommendation to the King, or the King himself making a decision, or a future monarch to be able to do that, of removing a title. It probably comes as a great surprise that you can give a title, but you can't remove it. So that's why I researched this issue. And of course, because the associations of Duke of York with the city I represent, the city of York, and we wanted to see that separation between the two. When polled, 88% of my constituents say that they didn't want the Duke to carry a title bearing the name of our city, and that's why I follow through on this issue. And since many of my constituents have written to me about this matter.
In saying that, I mean, I think there is precedent for some of this. I mean, the Duke of Albany, I think back in the 1910s, lost their title. 4 people did after they sided with the Germans during the First World War. I think if you did want this to happen, there is simply just an act of Parliament, isn't there?
Well, you're referring to the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, which was exercised as a result of being on the enemy's side during the First World War. The problem with that legislation is that it named individuals within the clauses, whereas my legislation would be able to then be applied to anybody in the future as well. So we wouldn't have this situation ever having to occur again, where we don't have the mechanisms in order to achieve the aim, which is obviously to end the use of the title.
Isn't the main problem here, though, is that Prince Andrew hasn't done anything wrong when it comes to the eyes of the law. He's not been convicted of any crime here. He's always denied any wrongdoing. I mean, under what circumstances would you be removing these titles?
Well, I'm not playing judge or jury here. I'm just simply saying to create the mechanism by which that could occur. But ultimately,
you're doing this in the context of Prince Andrew. You're doing this in the context of Prince Andrew. Let's be honest about that. The reason we're talking about this today is because of him.
And we're back in this space again, where there's been an unsatisfactory outcome, and this is what the victims and survivors' families are saying, and that they're the people we really do need to listen to today about all the associations. I mean, it's very clear that Andrew did have those associations.
We have to talk about the alleged victims here, because, as I say, he has not been convicted of anything.
No, I didn't make that association at all. What I said is that he had associations with Jeffrey Epstein, of which there were victims and survivors from that abuse that we do know took place. So, of course, what we want to make sure is that there are mechanisms in place, whether they're triggered or not, that I am not making that call. What I'm saying is that there aren't those mechanisms in place, and really there should be. And this would address issues around all titles and peerages as well, my bill would.
Well, just finally on that, I mean, you talk about the mechanism here, but there'll have to be someone making that judgment call, doesn't there? I mean, who would that be? And isn't the concern then that this could become party political, that essentially, not maybe necessarily in this case or further down the line, but that at some stage politicians could use it against people they simply just do not politically like?
Not at all. What it actually does is move the powers into the hands of the monarch, and that's what's really important. But setting up the mechanism has to go through Parliament because there are no mechanisms at the moment. I mean, I think in reality what there would need to be is a discussion between the Palace and Parliament to determine exactly how far-reaching those measures are, but ultimately there would have to be a clause in a constitutional bill or a private member's bill or some other government bill to be able to exercise that measure and put that in place.
Well, what do John and Tom think about this? Tom?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that we're expecting Virginia Giuffre's book to be published tomorrow, and clearly she lived a very troubled life and endured an awful lot of suffering, and I think actually she should be at the forefront of all of our minds tonight. I don't suspect that the next few days are going to be particularly easy for the Palace with the publication of that book. And it does feel to me like there is a bit of a head of steam building in Parliament for this to be looked at. Obviously, Rachel Maskell there is in a position to bring forward a presentation bill, which she could have debated on the floor of the House fairly easily. That would then potentially be divided or not, and then could then be on the order paper on a Friday thereafter, which could potentially pass second reading without division.
Because I think, as far as I understand it, his title as the Duke of York is essentially in abeyance. It's not actually been removed. I think there's an argument about trying to protect his daughters around all of that. Yeah. But in the end, also people want to see his title as Prince taken away, which I think is a right from birth. You're seeing MPs, if there was a vote, would get rid of that, you think, tonight?
You could certainly see a route whereby that could end up on the statue, but it may well be, of course, that it's something that the Palace would ask government to look at. We're a long way from that at the moment, I think, but I can certainly see a route where Rachel Maskell and others could bring that to Parliament, and you could see a debate that could potentially end up in law. But I think, you know, the princesses as well have a impeccable record, do an awful lot of good. I wouldn't want to see them adversely impacted by all of this.
John?
I couldn't care less what's difficult for the Palace and what's easy for the Palace. I heard some anodyne Labour minister earlier on today saying, oh, this is all a matter for the Palace. No, it's not. We fund the royal family at vast expense. Of course, his title should be taken away. As you correctly say, it's not been removed. It's just been parked for a wee while. So it should be stripped of all the flummery that he enjoys.
Isn't this complicated by the fact, though, he does deny any wrongdoing?
Well, he would, wouldn't he?
But he's also not been convicted of anything here. And we do live in a country, in which you are innocent until proven guilty.
He paid her 12 million
without taking any responsibility.
Well, sorry, would you hand over 12 million quid to somebody if you were entirely innocent? Hello, come on.
I don't have 12 million quid.
Of course you don't. I understand even Sky salaries don't. That's more a BBC salary scale.
But on a serious note...
Of course he should have his title taken away. He handed over £12 million. The other thing I think I'd quite like to know is, where did that 12 million quid come from? We hear that the King might have contributed some money. We don't know the answer to that. We hear the late Queen might have contributed some money. He certainly didn't have the money. Where did the money come from?
OK, and just very finally, Tom, on all of this, I mean, this is, yet again, just... It overshadows everything the monarchy is trying to do.
And actually, there's an awful lot of positive that the monarchy does, week in, week out. You think about some of that intervention into charitable work, highlighting those good causes. I do think that anything that detracts from that is enormously unhelpful. But also, people come from around the world to see our royal family. We should be really proud. I'm really proud of the royal family. I'm really proud of the contribution they make. I think it goes to the heart of what it is to be British. OK, definitely a dividing line on that issue, yes. I can tell. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a look at what's coming up later on tonight here on Sky News, because, of course, this will definitely feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have an extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Times chief political correspondent, Aubrey Albrighetti, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Starmer. That's from 10:30 tonight here on Sky News. Now, coming up next here on the Politics Hub, have a look at this. Donald Trump sharing an AI-generated video to mock protesters. It involves poo. We'll be looking at what that says about the president and his love of AI, and whether it blurs the line between fantasy, reality and politics. After the break, you definitely won't want to miss it.
Coming up on the UK tonight at 8, the latest on the Prince Andrew allegations. As a Buckingham Palace source says, they are of grave concern and should be examined fully. Also ahead, police drop charges against Graham Linehan as the Met says They'll no longer investigate non-crime hate incidents, and the life-changing eye implant, which is helping blind people to read again. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shot's running out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat.
It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island. The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin.
Jerry, any comments on the judge's decisions? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Right, welcome back to the Politics Hub on this Monday evening. Now, Donald Trump's use of social media is, you could say, quite unusual for a US president, though he's a pretty unusual US president himself, not least of all because of that artificially generated videos and photos that he uses to make a political point. And we saw that over the weekend with this AI-generated video of himself as a king in a fighter jet dropping what we'll describe as brown liquids, but I think you can probably guess what it is, on protesters, mocking, of course, those demonstrations we saw, No King demonstrations across the United States over the weekend. I mean, that is quite something. Where do I start? John?
He's grotesque, isn't he? That's really the only word.
Juvenile, maybe, to be a bit kinder.
No, it's absolutely grotesque. So this is an American president who is showing an AI-generated video of him dumping fecal matter over his fellow Americans. Now, I worked in American politics, worked in the Senate. I'm trying to imagine my generation of senators ever considering doing something like this. The president, historically, whether he was a Republican or a Democrat, was the healer-in-chief. He was the person who united.
Yeah, but we feel like, I mean, and he's been part of it, we feel we've moved on from that. And, you know, in an era of social media... Well,
when did we agree? When did we agree that?
Well, he's the president of the United States. He did get elected, not once but twice. Tom?
Well, he lost the popular vote the first time, and the second time, the smallest majority in recent years.
But he still got elected twice.
I never cease to be shocked, really, by the lengths that he goes to communicate his message. And he is massively unorthodox. But I personally think that has just gone too far on this occasion. But he will be delighted with it because, of course, we're all talking about it, aren't we? And that's the fact. He is a master at cornering attention, being talked about, and that works for him politically, doesn't it?
Well, we did see this earlier on this year, it must be said, when it came to Gaza as well. We remember that plan to essentially build lots of gold statues and buildings and this kind of almost utopian society. The thing is, though, John, and I get your point that, you know, it's crude in these circumstances, you know, something that many people will hope never come to pass, but it does get attention.
Well, so does running down the street naked. It debases political dialogue and political debate. And the problem is he sucked his whole party into this morass of debasement.
But if he was doing good things, would you then still, in your view, still take the same view of him?
Well, of course I would take a different view if he was doing good things rather than dividing
But
people.
just mean the style of communication.
Well, first of all, I don't believe in spreading disinformation, which is something that he does as a matter of course. But on the issue of debasing political debate, because he's so terrified his own party leadership, you've got the Speaker of the House today who's asked to comment on this, and you're in the position where the Speaker of the House won't condemn this. Nobody will condemn him because they're also scared of him.
Gentlemen, we have run out of time. Tom and John, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on the Politics
Pleasure.
Hub. And that is it for me for this evening. We're back, of course, at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. Do join me 10 if you can. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Oshi Shoshi, including more on the grooming gangs scandal. Stay tuned for that, and I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Goodbye.